and the emergency exits. I don't have to go over that. And you don't have to turn off your cell phone because we can't hear you anyway. And I do not offer any express or implied guarantees for the content of my presentation. It certainly represents best practices, but I don't make any guarantees. I have a lot of information to cover, so that's why I'm going to be going pretty quickly. Be trying to cover a lot of material in an hour. So without further ado, let's get going. So what is the problem with the internet? Well, first of all, when you think about it, every computer on the internet is connected to every other computer on the internet. And when you consider the fact that almost any computer with enough time and skill and patience can be hacked, that leads to an unfortunate combination. This means that people who are so inclined can make a lot of money from home, stealing your passwords, stealing your credit card numbers, stealing your identity, and so forth. So what you want to do is, in effect, not be the low-hanging fruit. If your computer is not secured well, then you are the low-hanging fruit. And as this graphic pithily shows, you want to be one of those blue computers, the more secured computers at the top of the tree. And you don't want to be one of those red computers, the less secured computers at the bottom of the tree, because the hackers, represented by these guys with criminal outfits, are going to be able to spend less time and be more bang for their buck, basically, by attacking the low-hanging fruit, the poorly secured computers, and they won't really bother. They have no need to bother with trying to hack the more secure computers. So you want to be one of the blue computers instead of the red computers. And so the presentation is going to talk about how you can become a blue computer, basically. So what do hackers use to do their business? And then by and large, these days they use malware, which stands for, I hope some of you have heard, malicious software. It's software that automates what hackers do. So it takes a lot of time to hack a computer. And if you can somehow write some software that will do that work for you and also do that work for a lot of computers, tens, hundreds, thousands, even in some cases millions, then your bang for buck, your return on investment is pretty high. And over the years, I mean, you've probably heard of some of these types of viruses. I'm not going to go into much detail here, but these are arranged sort of in chronological order in terms of when they have first appeared on the internet, beginning with the original viruses, and then on up through more and more recent years, keyloggers, which try to capture your keystrokes, capture your passwords as you type them in, adware and spyware, which try to present ads to you and generally watch what you're doing, ransomware, which tries to ransom your computer, lock it up until you give them a credit card number, crypto miners, which try to use your computer as a Bitcoin mining computer, and bot farms, which is sort of a complicated topic, but it's ways of making your computer part of a large herd of computers to do various things that hackers would be interested in doing, often without your knowledge. So another recent event is that there is now available malware making kits that even your low-skilled hackers can purchase for a nominal fee. And they can use those to create, in reality, pretty sophisticated malware. In fact, some of these kits are even designed to let you deploy them easily in various means. So the upshot of all this, oops, I guess that's the upshot of that slide. So when you put all it together, there are a lot of more hackers, I think, out there on the internet doing more complicated things because it's basically easier. So what can malware do? A variety of things. They can steal your account IDs and passwords. They can lock up your computer until you give them a credit card or unransom your computer and the data therein. They can force advertising pop-ups on your computer, and they can make money off of that. They can also install other malware that can do a variety of things. I've read about some malware is basically, that's the job, is to make the first breachhead upon your computer, and then they'll invite other malware in. They can spy on you via your webcam and your microphone, can steal your photos and your files. They can add your computer to a bot farm, which I talked about. And then last but not least, so they can trick you into divulging your credit card information, your SSNs, and your passwords. So a lot of bad things. How do you know that you have malware? Well, hopefully you will learn about it first from your antivirus software if you have it, and it will tell you that it detects something. But often, though, you won't get an alert from your antivirus software because, as I'll say a few times, antivirus software doesn't always catch everything. So you might then be able to be seeing a new software installed in your device, new icons showing up, new web browser plugins. Your start page in your web browser might change. You might be seeing more passwords, pop-ups, I'm sorry. You might see, if you're noticing and paying attention, that your antivirus software has become disabled for some reason. Your computer often will slow down. Maybe you'll start crashing more. You'll start seeing unexplained new error messages. Your data volume will increase. You probably won't notice it, but if you look at your internet bill at the end, you might see if it shows your quantity that you have been using more internet than normal. And then sometimes you actually won't see any symptoms at all. So it's not always possible that you will know that you have malware. So let's just say that you are infected, and how do you go about removing it? Well, in reality, this is going to take some time, experience, and skill. It's not particularly easy. There are folks who purport to be able to do it, and they might do a fairly reasonable job, but it may be that they don't get it all. And as I mentioned, no antivirus software detects or prevents or removes all malware. And some malware, in fact, is designed to be virtually impossible to be removed. So sometimes the only solution is to wipe your computer, reinstall the operating system, and reinstall all of your applications and put your data back on. And that is assuming that you have been rigorous about making backups. So what I'm going to suggest here is that the best way to remove malware is to try to prevent it from happening in the first place. And the tips that I'll be giving to you in this presentation are all have that in mind. So I have come up with this metaphor for your home computer security. Try to imagine that this represents a chain. This is the chain in the title of the talk. I'm not a graphics designer, but imagine, if you can, that these 5 boxes represent 5 links in a chain, and I'll be talking about each one of these links in some detail. And to continue the chain metaphor, just like in a regular chain, every link in a chain is important. If one of your links becomes weakened, then your chain isn't going to do its job. So it really is necessary, because the links are interconnected and the chain is only as strong as the weakest link, is that you've got to do your due diligence with all the chains in your security chain. So, for example, if you pay attention to your passwords, but you don't pay attention to updating your software, then you're not doing yourself as much good as you think you are. But if you pay attention to all 5 of those links that I talked about, then you're going to be in much better shape. So I'm going to show you a picture here and ask yourself whether or not that represents your computer security chain. This actually happens to be a picture that I used to have on my wall at work. Somebody has gone to a great deal of trouble to find a very sturdy chain, a very sturdy lock. Then I guess for some reason they decided, maybe that, I'm guessing, the chain wasn't big enough, or was too big, I mean. And so they use a plastic ziplock to make the chain shorter, but the result is that anybody can walk up to this and with a fingernail clipper, they can remove that chain and get inside. So this is just another example, I hope, that every link in your chain is important. So we're talking about the first link, computers, and you'll see a running graphic along the top as we go along, and it will change whenever we move from one link of the chain to the next. So this is our first link. And when I talk about computers, I'm talking about obviously desktop computers and laptops. I'm talking about tablets, I'm talking about smartphones, but I'm also talking about a new class of devices referred to as the Internet of Things. In other words, they're just gadgets and devices that connect to the internet, uh, and in fact, you may not even think about them. But in my own house, I've got a number of these things that over time have just accumulated, and they are things, they're gadgets, and they are internet connected. And I'll be now talking about those by themselves in a moment. But first, just want everyone to realize and remember or acknowledge that every every computer, every computing device has an operating system. So Windows operating system, and iOS for your iPads and iPhones, Mac OS for your MacBooks, Android for your smartphones from Google and other manufacturers. Chrome OS is a laptop with its own Chrome OS operating system, Linux, and so forth. So you can see the icons for some of those. But the thing to remember is that operating systems are written in software, which means that they can be hacked, because basically any software can be hacked. And over time, vulnerabilities in those operating systems are routinely discovered. And then hopefully patches, security updates are released for those operating systems over time. So whenever vulnerabilities are discovered, so it's important and critical even to apply those updates, those patches. And just while I'm talking about it, I occasionally still see people running older versions of Windows, for example, XP, 7, 8, and Vista, none of which have for a very long time received security patches from Microsoft. So if you are running one of those, and if those are connected to the internet, they should not be connected to the internet. They're in essence sitting ducks. So it's just an example of how updates are so critical. So the Internet of Things that I was talking about a while ago, and I'm going to, the next bullet here is going to have a lot of words in it, but it's my way of trying to give you examples of all the many things that we're talking about, including your smart speakers like Alexas and your smart streamers, Roku's and Chromecasts, internet connected security cameras, baby monitors, garage door openers, televisions, smart locks, smart clocks, fire alarms, burglar alarms, refrigerators. I bought a refrigerator recently that has a Wi-Fi capability. I turned it on for a few minutes just out of curiosity and immediately turned it off because there's no reason for a refrigerator to be connected to my Wi-Fi. Um, and no matter what the vendor claims. So the problem here is that each one of these devices, which have operating systems and therefore can be hacked, are on your internal home network. And so if one of those gets hacked, then whoever hacks them potentially can be on your network, which makes their job much easier in trying to hack the other devices on your network, including your computers and tablets and smartphones. The problem here is that a lot of these IoT devices are really not secure. Not all of them are secure to start with. Some of them have patches for vulnerabilities that were discovered, and some of them don't. Some of them can be patched, and some of them actually don't even have a way of being patched. So you really have to go look at the vendor's web or manufacturer's website to see if they have anything on there that's helpful? Are there patches available, and how do I apply them? Anyway, you will probably find in some cases, especially with older devices like this, that there's not much information there and there's not much you can do to patch them. I have a couple of those myself. Newer devices, thankfully, are being designed so that they can be more easily patched. And I think that will be the case in the future, but it's certainly not the case now. A way that you can help yourself with securing computers and all your devices is to make use of computer security software, because you need help. It's not easy to do in some cases. There's a lot going on. So it used to be that we had to pay attention to firewalls that are part of operating systems for your computer and laptops. But the fact is now firewalls are built into most modern computers, so you don't have to worry about it. It's just there and it just works. On the other hand, antivirus software is still a thing, and I'm hoping that most of you use antivirus software in your computers. I know I know that not everyone does, and I know that some people think that if they install one, let's say they pay for a year of it and then it expires, that they're still protected, when in fact they're not, because unless that subscription is in place, that software is not getting updates, and so is not able to catch new malware. There is a little bit of controversy, I will say, about antivirus software these days. There are some security researchers who talk about how, in fact, antivirus can make your computer more vulnerable in some ways. And I can see that. I understand the point, but I still maintain that, at least for today and for the foreseeable future, that it makes sense for most people to have antivirus. I have it, and occasionally will catch something that I hadn't noticed, and I'm glad that I have it. Could be one day that we don't need it, but I don't think that day has come. And there's another class of security software referred to as ad blockers, which I will also talk about, and I think they're very useful. And finally, there's something called a VPN, a virtual private network, which I'll mention. So on to antivirus. Um, One thing to realize about antivirus is that they're not all equal. There's a very good website here, and if you get my slides later, you can refer to this, that has for a very long time ranked antivirus software in terms of how good they are in comparison to each other at detecting and preventing and removing various types of malware. And it's an interesting site to look at. But what you will see if you do look at it is that from year to year, uh, the rankings will change a bit. But what doesn't change is the fact that usually those that are in the top third, let's say, more or less stay in the top third from year to year, and those who are in the bottom third, by and large, stay there. And then sometimes those in the middle can move up or down. So the thing to pay attention to, and I'll actually give you some ideas about the better ones in a moment, is that you don't necessarily need to change your antivirus from year to year if they're not number one. As long as they're in the top third or so, they're doing a pretty good job. And again, if I haven't said it enough, no antivirus can detect all malware. And also, I've seen people search for antivirus on the internet, and they'll find a free one and install it and find out later that was actually hacked antivirus, fake antivirus, and they're in worse shape than they were before. So what you want to do is use a software that I'll show you in a minute. Before we do, though, I do want to uh, say something about this, and that is the eternal debate between Apple products and Microsoft. It's an age-old, in my mind, a religious debate. Some prefer one, some prefer the other, and I have no stake in that game, but I do want to make a couple of points here, because there are some people who have believed for a long time that if you're using an Apple device, that you're impervious to malware. So the question is, can you get malware? And the answer is actually yes, you can. It's not not that easy, but it can be done. And what I have noticed in the last year or two is that the frequency and number of Apple malware has actually increased pretty significantly. And I don't know why that is. There are various ideas among professionals as to why that's happening. I have my own opinions, but in fact, I really don't know why. It's just happening. So something to keep in mind. If you do have a Apple device and you don't have antivirus and you use the internet a lot, you may want to think about getting antivirus on it. And it's sort of a parallel question to this: is Apple safer than Microsoft? And I would say these days is a bit debatable. And part of the reason for that is that really with Windows 10, which has been out for a number of years now, Microsoft did a pretty good job relative to previous versions of Windows at securing it. Windows 10 is actually a pretty secure operating system, and you really couldn't say that at all about previous versions. So if you're interested in, if you don't have any antivirus, here's some to consider. If you're using Windows, one thing you probably could get by with these days is just use Microsoft's built-in Windows Defender. It's actually pretty good. It wasn't necessarily that good in its earlier incarnations, but nowadays it's not bad at all. If you are a Comcast subscriber, which I'm guessing that most of us are around here on the Cape, because there's not that many choices in where you can get your internet from, you can get Symantec, or otherwise known as Norton, free. And I hope that if you are a Comcast subscriber, you know this, and if you know it, you've actually downloaded it. Other brand names, McAfee, Bitdefender, F-Secure, Trend Micro, are all good. There are other ones that are good as well, but these have been around a long time, and they've been consistently good over time. I also use something called Malwarebytes as a secondary scanner, just to sort of double check on my primary antivirus occasionally. I don't pay for the paid version of it. I just run it occasionally, and it works perfectly fine just to run occasionally and see if it just basically, it's like getting a second opinion. There are others out there, the 3As, as I call them: Avast, AVG, and Avira. They work on a freemium model. You can use them for free, but if you want more features, you have to pay something. Now on to ads. Ads on the internet can trick you. If you're on a website and you see a bunch of ads on it, and usually they're sort of rotating through, and even in some cases, if you don't necessarily even click on it, but especially if you click on some of those ads are actually usually part of an ad network. So if you have a website, a small website, you pay this ad network. You get paid. In return, you put a link to their ad network, and they put ads on your website, and you don't even really know what ads they're putting there. All you know is that you're getting paid to put that link. And in some cases, hackers have taken over or slipped in, as it were, hacked ads. And so some of the ads that you see and some of the ads that you click on could in fact be hacked. And other than that, ads can also just slow your machine down, because usually ads are highly graphic in nature, a lot of video, a lot of large images, and they will just slow down your reading of the website, especially if you're using a older smartphone or older tablet. And these ad networks can also track your web behavior and even sell your web activity to those who are interested in that. So lots of reasons to be wary of ads. There's a class of security software nominally referred to as ad blockers, which will do a pretty good job at stopping those ads from appearing on your web pages. If you're using Windows, the one I use and which I will recommend is something called uBlock Origin. You can just do a web search in that and find it. Just be careful that there's also something called uBlock, which is a different product. But uBlock Origin does a nice job. It's open source. It's free. If you're using Macs or mobile devices, it's a little more complicated because of the way that Apple locks down their operating systems. but you can use, these are a few of the well-known ad blockers that have been around for a long time that do a reasonable job. And in some cases, I think there's a fee for at least unlocking part of it. In my own case, for example, on my iPad, I can't block ads because I use Chrome operating system, and there's just no way for it to happen. But if you're using Safari on Apple, which most people are doing, then you can probably install these and then protect yourself somewhat. Now, if you're concerned about a lot of smaller websites say that, well, if you block their ads, then they're going to lose their revenue and they can't exist. And that is true, I think. And what you can do with these ad blockers is, if you have favorite sites that you don't mind looking at their ads and you want that website to succeed, you can unblock them in the ad blocker so that you will see the ads for those sites, but you won't necessarily, or you won't see ads for sites that you haven't unblocked. So it's kind of a happy medium. The last class of security software that I want to just talk about, but I'm not going to talk about it much because it's a special case, virtual private network. This type of software creates a secure tunnel to the internet. And this graphic over here shows you what's happening. There's you, there's the internet, and then there's the VPN creating this tunnel. And if a hacker is on the same network as you or on the internet, they cannot see the traffic that's going between you and the internet or the website that you're going to, because it's all garbled up basically, and it gets garbled when it leaves your computer and gets ungarbled when it gets on the other side. So it's a good way of it's a good layer of security. Usually requires annual subscription, but it's especially good if you travel. If anybody you remember what travel was. And it's also good if you're very interested in staying private on the internet. There are many of them out there. The one I use is this one, private internet access, but there are plenty of other good ones. But this one I've been using for a while, does a reasonable job. Some of these VPNs are not as good as others, but this one's a good one. Now you can see from the graphic at the top, we're moving on to the next link in the chain, behavior. And what I mean by that is that you can be your own biggest risk on the internet. You can be your biggest risk by not updating your software, by downloading infected files, by opening suspicious email, visiting unsafe websites, clicking on unsafe links, using hacked Wi-Fi, let's say at an airport or at a hotel, and just not using security software, reusing or using weak passwords, which we'll dive into pretty deep later. So I'm going to give you a couple of tips on how you can be safer in your behavior. But first, I need to, unfortunately, get a little geeky. And we're going to go to school for one slide. And I'm going to talk about domain names. I just simply want to understand, I want you to all understand a basic idea about how the internet works. And that is that, as you know, websites are associated with names. They actually all have numbers, but people can't remember numbers. So we have this domain naming convention where ebay.com, everybody knows what that is. You know what npr.org is, Federal Trade Commission.gov, and there's the Russian mail site, and so forth and so on. But what you may not know, and it's good to know, is that domain names can have subdomains. So eBay itself, as an example, it's a big site, and they have, I think, around 40 subdomains. These are just two of them. And they will prefix their ebay.com with something. And some of these URLs you can go to, some of them are just designed to work internally. But the point is that if you have an eBay, if you have a domain something.something, you can have as many subdomains in front of that as you want. And this becomes important in a couple of ways. First of all, hackers can put up bad websites that in their domain naming are designed to look safe. So if you look at this website quickly, you might think to yourself, oh, there's eBay. And let's just say it's in a link and you don't really pay much attention to it. You click on it and you might be going to a hacked site and thinking that you're going to eBay. So you want to, and I'll talk more about this in the next two slides, pay attention to the parts on either side of the rightmost dot. If it is a .com and it is eBay, let's for example, on the left side of that dot, then you can be pretty sure that's eBay, even if they have something else in front of the eBay. So to put this in practical use, is say you're going to a website or you're about to click on a link and you're not entirely sure about it. You have a reason to be a little hesitant. What you can do is hover your mouse if you're using something with a mouse, or if you're using a mobile device. In most cases, you can just long press. That means you touch the link with your finger and hold it. This was referred to as a long press. And then you will be able to see the actual URL that that link is supposed to be going to somewhere. And when I say somewhere, I have to say somewhere because it depends on which web browser you're using. It depends on what kind of device you're using. But normally, for me, for example, with Windows, and no matter which web browser I'm using, it's going to show up down at the bottom left of the browser, the actual link that's associated with that hyperlink that I'm about to click on. So I can preview that link before I actually click on it. And occasionally that's really handy. You'll find that it just doesn't seem to match up. It isn't what I think it is. And that's a good way to not click on something that you shouldn't have clicked on that you regret later. Another thing you should do, and I hope that you all do this already, but just to be sure, in your web browser, there's a padlock. All modern web browsers have it. And they'll look different, but they'll look something like this one. And so here I am going to paypal.com, and that padlock is locked, and there are no error messages. And I'm pretty sure that that's PayPal's website, because they pay an annual fee for a web certificate, and which guarantees, or virtually guarantees, that they are who they say they are. But here's a case where I typed in paypal.com just to see what would happen. And just as I had hoped, the padlock goes away and I get an alert message. And the alert message that you'll see in your web browser will be different depending which web browser you're using, but it'll be something other than a padlock. It might turn red, it might turn yellow, turn some color. It'll alert you somehow. So that's also something to keep in, always make sure you're looking at. And then another way to protect yourself when you click on links is to use antivirus and to use an ad blocker, because they will, in some cases, give you alerts as well. More antivirus packages and a lot of these ad blockers look at lists of known bad websites. If you're going to one of them, they'll give you an alert. Similarly with email, obviously we all know this, that you don't open suspicious email or attachments. Mark them as spam so you don't see them again. But here again, what you can do is hover your mouse over an email, or hover a mouse over the link in an email, or long press it, and you will, not a link, but it's the email addresses, the sending email address, and you will see the actual email address of the sender. Here's an example from my own Gmail spam folder. I long pressed on UPS customer service, and Google popped up the actual domain associated with that email. And very obviously and very clearly, that's not UPS. That's something else. And that is why it's in my spam folder. And that's probably why it's going to be your spam filter too. But if your no spam filter is perfect, and if it gets through, and if it looks a little funny to you, that's the way you can look at it. Match up what it should be, what you think it should be, with what it actually is. And again, using antivirus software is just another layer of defense for you. And then when it comes to behavior, the best thing you can do for yourself, and I'll probably belabor this too much, is update everything. And you want to update the operating systems for your computers, laptops, tablets, smartphones, the network device, and your IoT devices. And similarly, you want to make sure that your software gets updated, your apps on your mobile devices, and even your web browsers. I see, unfortunately, that some web browsers, including Chrome, don't get updated automatically, except if you see a little alert at the top right, and if you click on it, then you'll update your web browser. So there are lots of different types of software that you need to pay attention to make sure that you're keeping them up to date. Oh, we're moving along pretty quickly here. So, Regina, if you'd like to see if we had any questions, maybe we didn't, but I haven't.
Yes, we have had a question.
Okay.
It's from Ron Clark.
Hello, Ron.
If your router supports a guest network, does it help to put, it says IoT devices. I'm thinking that's devices.
Oh, did I have a misspelled word?
Yes, okay. Network to keep apart from computers. Are there routers that support a separate subnet for such devices apart from guest?
Yes, Ron. In fact, when we get to the network section, I'll say that very thing, that you want to put your IoT devices on your guest network. No question about it. I think if you were to get a router that's not necessarily a consumer router, you could get even geekier about it. You could set up subnets and segment things off even further. But I think by and large, putting these devices on your guest network and making sure the guest network is isolated from your main network, then there's very little harm that can happen if one of those IoT devices gets hacked.
We have one more question. Georgia asks, will antivirus not help a computer running Windows 7?
The problem with Windows 7 is that there has not been a security update released for it in I don't know how many years. So any vulnerability that's been discovered for it since then exists on that Windows 7 PC. It should not. I plead with anyone who has one to not put it on the internet. Will antivirus help? Well, it won't hurt. But by and large, since we already know that antivirus won't catch everything, if something attacks that Windows 7 PC, the antivirus may not help. So I urge you fervently to just replace it with a Windows 10 PC. You probably can't upgrade it to Windows 10 if it's that old.
We have two more questions here. Do we have time for them? I think they'll be quick.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Suzanne asks, I am getting many requests to allow cookies. Should I allow these? Are they safer? And if I refuse cookies, how will it affect my internet browsing?
That's a good question, and it's a big topic. It's something that I thought one day that I might do a talk on privacy itself, which and cookies are a big part of that. What you want to try to do, well, first of all, I've already talked about ad blockers, and those will do a lot of the heavy lifting for you. But at the very least, a lot of web browsers now will allow you to make a setting to not allow third-party cookies. Third-party cookies are basically ad cookies. And if you prevent those, then the web trackers are not able or less able to track you. Some websites might be a little finicky about you blocking third-party cookies, but most won't. It's the primary cookies that they are most concerned about. So there won't be, I can't imagine any harmful effects from blocking third-party cookies. But blocking cookies altogether sometimes will cause a website not to function. Quite so. But if you have an ad blocker, you can, as I mentioned, whitelist that website in your ad blocker, so that when you go to it, you don't have any problems. But it will continue to block your cookies on other websites.
There's one question that's a yes or no.
Okay.
Is WebRoot an anti-software?
Antivirus software. It is. Yeah, it is. And I think I would have to go back to that website that I posted a little earlier to find out how it's doing these days. It's been around for a very long time. If it's legitimate, if that's what you're asking about. It's good software, but I don't hear about it as much as I used to.
Okay, I think that's it for now.
Okay, what are we doing? Okay, so let's move on to the next link in the chain, and that's our spotlight, as it were, for the talk today, passwords. So ask yourself if any of these are what you do when it comes to managing your passwords. You use short passwords. You use common passwords, password 123, believe it or not, one of the most popular passwords on the internet. You use the same password for anything, and I hope you're not that person. You have 4 or 5 pet passwords that you just cycle through for all of your passwords. You use password patterns. Whenever you get prompted to change your password, you just increment the number at the end by 1 and off you go. You use the name of your favorite team, your children's name, etc., in or for your password. So I think I don't need to belabor the point, even though I will later. These are not good practices for managing your password, and I'll try to explain why. So passwords can be stolen in several ways. If your device or computer is infected, it can capture your keystrokes when you type a password in. If you go to a website that's been infected, it can also capture the keystrokes that whenever you type in a password, and then it can, in both cases, those passwords get shipped off to whatever hacker owns that malware. Also, hackers or their malware can steal large numbers of passwords from a website, hundreds, thousands, in some cases millions of passwords. And then the miscreant can spend their time running those passwords through password guessing software and password cracking software. And very often, if it's a short password, if it's a common password, or in some case, just generally a weak password, it's not too much trouble to figure out what it is. And once a hacker cracks in a way your ID and your password, they'll then very often turn around and try to use them on other sites. They'll take the password that they found out for some minor website and then see if maybe you're using it also on Amazon. You're also using it on various banking sites, also on eBay and so forth. So once they steal these passwords, even if the passwords that are stored on websites are encrypted, and it's a mathematical process that makes them hard to read, it is possible these days to, with off-the-shelf computer equipment, build pretty powerful password cracking computers. So these computers can try literally millions of passwords per second when they're trying to guess passwords from lists of common passwords. It takes a little bit longer for encrypted passwords, but they can still try a healthy a number of them in a short amount of time. So how long does it take? This is my son actually is a computer security researcher, and he's home for a little bit during the pandemic. Just get out of New York City. And he sat down next to me and he told me how long it would take him, this is something he does in his work, to crack these different passwords. So the first password here is a pretty simple one. It's 8 lowercase alphabetic characters, 2 words in the dictionary. You cracked it in 7 seconds using an off-the-shelf laptop. And then so I said, okay, let's try mixed case, add a number to it. It took him 8 minutes. All right, let's add special character and make it even longer. And he calculated, he has a way of calculating, it would take him about 2 days to do it. And then I created a 12 character, essentially random character password. And his estimation is that would, in essence, be uncrackable. Nobody would spend that much time trying to crack my password. They might spend that much time trying to crack a top secret agency password of some kind, but not anybody listening to this call. So that tells you, it tells us that if you have a simple password, and in reality, anything other than a 12 character random password, by and large, it's crackable. So the upshot in the lesson is that you want to make your passwords strong, especially for your email, because email can be used to gain access to some of your other accounts, because you're probably very often if you want to change a password for a site, they'll send the email of record an email, and if you, the hacker, have access to that email, they can pretend like they are you. And your financial sites, and then your password manager, which we'll talk about, and you want to make those passwords unique, random, and long. It will be 12 characters long at least these days, because that's really about the minimum length that keeps those passwords from being cracked. Mixed case letters, numbers, and special characters, and not to use words in the dictionary or anything about you. So the problem then with passwords is that when you consider the fact, reportedly, that the average person has about 75 passwords, it's just on average, and I in fact have far more than that. Some of you may have fewer than that. Some of you may have more than that, but even if you have fewer than that, it's still very difficult to remember a unique, strong, random password for each one of those. It's just nobody can do it. And I think this cartoon sums it up in a way. I like the guy. I like the look on the guy's face as he tries to grapple with all the passwords he's trying to keep track of in his head. So, what is the solution? Well, what a lot of people do is that they will rely on their web browser to save their passwords. I used to say, well, this is a bad idea because these were known to be vulnerable, not particularly secure. They've gotten better in recent years, but in terms of the things that they can do compared to what a password manager can do, and I'll talk about it, they are limited. They're limited in their functionality, and I still recommend that people don't do it. In many cases, that password exists on that PC. If it's captured that PC, you can't even tell what the password was after it's captured. If you forget if your PC dies, you've lost your passwords and so forth. Lots of problems with it. If you are an all Apple user, there is Apple Keychain, and it's not a bad solution. I'm not an all Apple person, so I don't rely on Keychain, but as I understand it, it's certainly better than nothing. However, I will make the case that using a password manager is an improvement, even for you folks. You could write them down on a piece of paper and lock them away. It's not a bad approach as long as you're willing to put the time into it. And you can even create a password protected file in Word and text file or whatever, but you need to figure out a way of, well, in Word, you can put a password on it. Just make sure the password's strong and make sure you back up that file. So these are all things you can do, but what I'll suggest to you that there's a better way, and that is to use a password manager. And these are the advantages of using one of these. is that you can easily create a complex, unique password for each of your accounts. You don't have to remember those passwords any longer. You only have to remember the one password that's for your password manager, and that should be a very good password. You should write that one down and hide it away. The password managers typically will auto log you on to your accounts on the web. They do a pretty good job. Only in a few cases do they struggle a little bit if it's a kind of an offbeat site. You'll be able to do this from all of your devices where you have the password manager installed, or if you're just using the web version. You can export your passwords to a file if you just feel like you want to do that, and secure that file, of course, or you can print them out and secure your printout so you have a nice backup. You can share passwords with members of your family, for example, securely, and it's a very nice feature. You don't have They don't have to keep the password themselves. You can just share it with them, and every time you change it, they see the change. Um, some of these password managers even have the ability to warn you if it is discovered that one of your IDs and passwords has been shown up on what is called the dark web, where essentially it's been stolen. So you might get an alert. It's a nice feature. A very important feature, I think, especially for here on the Cape, is that some of these will allow access for your survivors. In other words, you'll get an email every once in a while saying, in essence, are you still with us? And you reply, yes. But if after a while they send those out and you never reply, after a little bit more time goes by of your own choosing and ahead of time, your survivors will get an email that will lead to them to be able to get into your password manager and all your passwords, which in today's time is pretty useful because unless you've made other arrangements, they may not be able to get into some key financial accounts otherwise. I actually have this turned on and even have it referred to in our will. And of course, a very important benefit of password managers is that passwords are always backed up to the cloud. So you ask yourself, is that safe? Is it safe to put all your eggs in that one basket? And I will say to you that it's reasonably safe, and for the following reasons. First of all, these password manager companies only have one job, and that's to secure your passwords. It's very important to them, and their business model relies on keeping your passwords secure. They devote a lot of time and talent and effort to it. Normally, and as I mentioned before, any software can have vulnerabilities, but in every case where I have read about password managers having a vulnerability discovered, usually by a security researcher, and the security researcher will normally tell these password manager companies on the down low before it's publicly talked about, they patch them very quickly before anybody on the outside, i.e. hackers, learn about it. Passwords are strongly encrypted. It's not just garden variety encryption, but it's very strong. Essentially, it's impossible to decrypt it with cracking software. The vendor does not have access to your passwords. Whenever you create a password on your machine and then it gets backed up to the cloud, it gets encrypted on your own PC, and then it gets sent up to the storage area. All the vendor has is the encrypted version. They have no access to your passwords. I will say that I do recommend that you add something called, if you use a password manager, two-factor authentication, which I will talk about on the next slide. Two-factor authentication. I assume some of you have heard about it, but just for those who haven't, yeah, it gets its name from the fact that a password is something you know, and a second factor is something you have. And that would include something like a hardware token. And let's see, there's a picture of a YubiKey. I happen to use several YubiKeys, but Google makes a security key. A company called RSA does, even though they are mostly for the corporate world. I would say that YubiKey is the market leader by far for consumer security keys. It might be something called a two-factor app. It would be on your smartphone. Google Authenticator is an example. Authy and Duo are some more examples. I happen to use Authy. And so on your smartphone, you'd have this app, and every 60 seconds, a code would change. And whenever you go to your website and it asks for the code, you look at your smartphone and there's the code. You type it in on the website, and that's your second factor, and you're let in. Nobody else has. Uh, the hackers don't really have a way of finding that out. Google is starting to figure out how your smartphone can be used as a second factor. If you're a Google user, you'll have noticed probably at some point that you'll get a prompt saying, someone just tried to log on to your Google whatever. Is this you? And you can just type yes on your phone, and you're in. And if anyone else tries to do it and it wasn't you, you'll know about it. I think this is something you'll see more often in the future. And finally, there's the good old text message. This has been around a long time, and unfortunately is probably the most prevalent method of two-factor authentication still. And I say unfortunately because smart text messages aren't necessarily that secure. There are ways, various ways, which I don't get into. Someone who's determined they can um, subvert your text messages and get these codes that get sent to your phone by text when you're trying to get into a particular website. But it's certainly better than nothing. It's better than not having any two-factor authentication turned on at all. So what I will suggest is that for password management, if you use a password manager, and I'll show you some in a minute, and which will then allow you to have strong passwords for each one of your accounts. And then if you add to that two-factor authentication, you are in good shape with securely managing your passwords. Here are some that are out there. These have all been around a good while, except for Bidwarden. Bidwarden is relatively new, but it's making a splash. It's has a lot of functionality, and I like a lot about it. It's actually an open source package. I've been using LastPass for many years. Dashlane started in the Mac world. 1Password is probably the biggest competitor to those two. You can't go wrong with any of these. There are others, and some of those are quite good. But if you know nothing about password managers, I think these are a good place to start and have a look at. We're moving on now to our fourth chain, link in the chain, our home network. This one's going to be kind of quick. And the reason it's going to be quick is it's a little bit complicated, as I will show you. So don't be frightened of this diagram too much. It's simpler than it looks. I'm just trying to depict what a typical home network is and what it looks like. You have the internet coming in here to the left, and then you might have one device there if you're a Comcast user, and if you're renting your networking equipment from Comcast, you'll have one device. I happen to have three devices, and you might have three devices. There's the cable modem, and then I have separately a wireless router and then separately a wired router. So yeah, it just depends on how you've got it configured. But that's what a typical home network looks like. Something that gets internet to come into your network and something to send the internet to your gadgets in your house. The sad truth, though, about consumer networking devices, and I'm showing a picture of the Comcast gateway, but it's really not. There are all kinds of consumer networking equipment out there, so I just showed a picture of one. Is that routers are typically or notoriously insecure. I read constantly about how vulnerabilities have been discovered with various consumer routers from well-known companies, D-Link and and the rest. It's unfortunate, but it's just it's a fact of life. In many cases, they're not even patched. In some cases, they're patched after a long period of time, uh, and occasionally they're patched quickly. But if you have an older networking device, you will probably want to go, if you haven't already, look at the manufacturer's website to try to figure out as best you can whether that device needs an operating system update, a security patch. If you are renting your network device from Comcast, which again, I'm assuming a lot of you around here do, maybe I'm the only one who doesn't, they are usually, well, they will be updating your device. So that is certainly an advantage of renting your networking equipment from your internet provider. And some of the newer consumer routers, especially the so-called mesh routers that you can buy these days from Google and from Eero and a few others, they come along with self-updating capability, which is a very, very, very good thing. And I encourage anybody who has an older router and they're not renting it from their internet provider, and if they haven't updated it, that it may be easier really to buy a new device than to try to figure out how to do it yourself. It's not particularly simple, so you might need help with it to secure your device. These are the sorts of things that you want to do. Some of these your eyes may roll back in your head at, but I'm going to list them anyway. You want to disable remote access to it for an administrative account. You want to change the default admin ID and password. You want to turn on WPA2 encryption. Those are things that if you're not technical, you're going to have trouble with. So you want to ask somebody. Maybe you have a geeky a nephew or daughter or someone who you can say these things to and they can figure it out. Things you can do though is make sure that your Wi-Fi password is pretty strong, especially if you live in an area where your neighbors can see your Wi-Fi network and you can see theirs. You want to apply the security updates if you can, and as I said a while ago, replace them every 5 years or 5 years or so, because the technology changes pretty rapidly with these things, and they're becoming better and better at a rapid clip. There's no reason to have an old networking device these days. They're not that expensive. And as Ron asked about a while ago, you want to create an isolated guest network. If your router doesn't allow you to do that, that's a cue for you to think about changing. Create a guest network, put your everything on it that you want to keep separate from your main network, including your guests. It's more than just for your guests. It's for all the devices that you don't 100% trust and you don't really need to be on your main network. And that'll do a lot for securing your home network. And now we are entering into our last link of the chain. And this will be a quick one, backups. So you have to ask yourself, do you have files you can't afford to lose? And if you don't, then you don't need to pay attention to this. But I think that most of you are thinking to yourself that you do. And so you have to keep in mind that malware or just plain old garden variety hardware failure can destroy your data. So you want to back it up. There's two basic methods of doing it. The first method is something that's been a go-to for many, many, many years. And maybe this is what you used to do. Maybe this is what you currently do. Just back your files up to an external drive. But the problem with it for many people is in my experience is that they don't do it as often as they should. They just don't get around to it. The other problem with it is that that external drive is in your house. And so if something bad happens, let's say a hurricane or fire or whatever, then when your computer burns up, most likely so will your backup. The other method is to use a cloud backup. And the obvious advantage of it is that it works automatically. And if your house burns up or blows away, your data will live just fine where it is. It's somewhere far away from you. And these are just a few backup services that you can think about or consider. If you don't have that much data, 5 gigabytes. I know not all of you know how to calculate it, but if you do, and if you don't have that much data, then these, you might recognize some of these. iCloud for Apple people, Google Drive for Google people, something called Dropbox, and then Microsoft has something called OneDrive. These are all good. They're all free for modest and small amounts of data. If you have a lot of data, like I do, have a lot of photographs, and you might have a lot of data, then there are others out there that are good. I use iDrive and have for many years. It's fairly inexpensive on a yearly basis. Carbonite and Backblaze. There are others, but if you want to explore this arena, then these are some good ones to look at first. So we actually, believe it or not, have come to the end of my slides. And I have a slide here to summarize what we've talked about. These, if you've listened to nothing, or if you just want to pay attention to the most important things, these are the things you should remember and do to the best of your ability. Is just update everything, your operating systems, security patches for everything. Use security software, especially ad blockers and antivirus. Use strong, unique passwords. Use a password manager. Think before you click. And back up what you cannot afford to lose. And that is the end of it. So Regina, unless I've driven everybody away.
No, wow, I have learned a lot, and I'm nervous. I plan to spend the rest of the day creating unique, random, and long passwords.
Well,
So
then
you've
I
got
think
me there.
I'm glad you said that, because that means I have succeeded.
Oh, wonderful.
If I've frightened you, that was my job.
Good. We do have a couple
Halloween
more
approaches.
questions coming in if you're open for it.
I certainly am.
Shan is asking.
Shan, my brother-in-law in Alaska. Shan, how are you doing?
Oh, well, welcome from Alaska. Is it important to have strong passwords for every website? For example, should I care if someone hacks my New York Times password?
It only matters, Shan, as long as you're not using that password for any other website. It's probably less important that it'll be strong. But if you're using a password manager, you have no reason not to make every password strong, because it makes it essentially easy and a no-brainer. So I guess I would turn the question around and say, why not use a strong password for everything? Then you don't have to worry about anything, or you have to worry less about things getting hacked.
Okay, we have another question from John. 2 methods I have used for years for security. 1, have separate email address with another provider used strictly with financial sites, which almost totally prevent phishing attempts, as that email address stays mostly hidden. Is that do you have a reaction?
Certainly a good practice if you don't mind managing more than one email address. Yeah, it's a good idea. There's no downside to that approach at all.
So that it was not.
Yes. I'm sorry, I was getting a question in my ear.
No, I was saying it's a good idea to have if you have no problem managing multiple email addresses, devoting one to your financial accounts is certainly a good idea.
Sarge Slicer probably might have come in late, and he's asking how to get copy of slides.
Yeah, just reply to the email that invited you, that confirmed your participation in this Zoom thing, and that'll go to my wife, and she will give me your email address, and I'll send it out to you.
Okay, that's usually comes up as Sherry B.
Sherry B, that's right.
My email. A question from John again. I guess he had a 2-part. He also uses mnemonic for passwords, so the actual password isn't listed on printout, but just the name of the value.
Mnemonics. So in other words, it's going to be all alphabetic characters, I assume.
I'm not understanding either. Perhaps
Yeah, I'm not.
John will add to it and clarify
But
it.
anyway, if that's the case, I think of a mnemonic as first letter of each word in a phrase, or just some word that helps you remember each part of the password. I think they're typically going to be alphabetic. You want to avoid all alphabetic passwords. So I'm not exactly sure how you'd use mnemonics unless you have a method that would make something that's equivalent to a random mixed case with numbers with special character passwords.
Georgia asks, if your computer is unknowingly infected with malware, will your external hard drive backup also have the malware?
It's quite possible. If yeah, it depends on the malware, but it's quite possible. You put your backup drive in your USB port, and depending on the malware, they can detect that, and they can see that that's just another drive to the malware. And so depending on what that malware is designed to do, yeah, it could encrypt that external drive, just like it would encrypt your main drive, and then make you cough up a credit card number to get it unlocked. Sure, it's not impervious to malware by any means, an external backup drive.
Martha asks, when you update your software, does the ad blocker antivirus software also have to be updated at the same time?
Most modern antivirus packages update themselves.
Okay.
The ad blockers, I think, will be in the same case if they're a modern one. But a lot of ad blockers rely on lists, which do get refreshed by the ad blocker on a frequent basis. So yeah, I think in general, you can say they're updating themselves.
Okay. Georgia says, any thoughts on question 1? And I'm not sure what that is referring to.
Neither can I.
Okay. Well,
Question 1, does that mean this?
on the ballot. Oh, on the ballot. That's
That's that's an interesting question. Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
Yes or no? That's another question.
Yeah. So for those who aren't following along, that's the ballot initiative where local or small auto repair places want the right to fully plug into your car's computer, just like the big car manufacturer repair places, Subaru and Toyota, etc. And there's pluses and minuses to that. I'll just say this, I voted yes on it. I see that the benefits to the businesses and the benefits to me outweigh what I consider to be a fairly minimal risk in them being interested in knowing where I drove. I honestly don't care that much. And now, if you have a car where your smartphone is plugged into the car, I guess it's theoretically possible for your local mechanic, if they knew how, maybe if they're very cunning, to get access to stuff on your smartphone. But I think it's pretty unlikely. Hard to do.
Well, I'm glad to get your take on it. Interesting. I believe this may be a final question. It's not a question, it's a comment. Good job and thanks.
Thank you.
Bob, I thank you very much. So much good information in here. I think we need this now more than we've ever needed it. So thank you so much for this. And I hope you come back to another class sometime in the near future to continue teaching us things that we should know. If I could have your attention for a few minutes before you all leave, I wanted to mention a couple of classes that are coming up in the learning series. We have Joe Marcio on modern classical music. If you you think about Leonard Bernstein, Philip Glass, Jennifer Higdon, and of course Joe's great talents as a teacher, I think you should give it a try. And the last class that we will be scheduling is in our series is Dan Wolf, who's a former Massachusetts senator and a founding CEO of Cape Air. It's going to be a discussion on the future political scene on November 11th at 10:30. I'd like to also discuss the future with you a little bit. If you've enjoyed the learning series for this series on Zoom, and if you've ever come to classes at the library and appreciate the thing that is the learning series, we're thinking about the future very much. We want to restart, reinvent, redo, and definitely recruit for the future, because things have changed. The series will have to change, and there's a lot to do, and it's an exciting time. What I'd like you to do, figure out if you're a person who enjoys teaching, planning, scheduling, organizing, coordinating, and like to run Zoom meetings. We're very interested in you making a contact with our volunteer coordinator at the Eldredge Public Library. Contact Dan McPhee, the volunteer coordinator, and here's his email address. Thank you for joining us today for Computer Security at Home. Have a great day.